All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, maybe even good evening. Great to have you all here. I have one of the greatest guests here today with us. We're going to be talking about deliberate advocacy from survivor to CEO. And Maimah is my guest. You're going to meet her in just a moment for our 7th installment of The Deliberate Way. Now, I'm Dan Seawald. You may remember me from previous episodes. And I can think of no better way to light up your Tuesday than to hear all about the experiences of one of the real bright lights and luminaries in breast cancer awareness, advocacy, and really kind of helping people rethink, reimagine what it means to be a survivor and someone who is living with breast cancer. So for my first-time friends who haven't seen an episode before, The Deliberate Way is a way to explore the different ways that people who are experts in their craft approach their craft in a systematic or deliberate way. We look at people who are from musicians, scientists, advocates, theorists, marketers, you name it. And our goal is to try to understand the deliberate ways that they do things so that we can borrow just a little bit of technique and practice and apply it to our daily lives. And we have a real deliberate innovator here today with us. Maimah, I'm going to give a quick background for those who don't know you. If you don't know Maimah, shame on you. You should know Maimah. But if you don't, let me tell you a little bit about her. She's a mother. She's a philanthropist, an author, an advocate, a cancer warrior, a magazine publisher, life coach, entrepreneur, empath, badass. Yep, I said it, badass, and a unicorn. So that's a lot of categories, I'll tell you. Maimah, as your story a little bit, your story began in Liberia in West Africa, where you were born. And after surviving 2 wars in Liberia, during a 3rd coup d'etat, you fled to the US as a 15-year-old, where your father put you on a plane alone to avoid persecution. And after working your way through college and raising a 3-year-old, you were diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. You had no family history, 32 years old. I mean, unbelievable, 32, so unusual. But while in treatment, I understand you made a promise to yourself that if you survived, you'd create an organization to educate, empower, and advocate that supports young women who are affected by breast cancer. And as you all can see, she's here with me today. So you did pretty good. So amazing, awesome. And that's not the least of it. Since then, you've become the founder of the Tigerlily Foundation. Tigerlily educates, advocates, empowers, and supports young women before, during, and after breast cancer. You're also the author of Fearless, Awakening to My Life's Purpose Through Breast Cancer, and the publisher of Bliss Magazine. And you may have seen Maimah on Oprah Winfrey's show, the Today Show, maybe Good Morning America, depending on what station you like to tune into in the morning, or MSNBC and many others. Maimah, it's really great to have you here with me. It's a real honor and treat to be able to chat with you today.
Dan, you're hired. You're hired. And thank you for that great introduction. I really appreciate it. As you were talking, I was thinking about the podcast name, Deliberate Way. And, it's really important, to highlight for me in my life. I've always been deliberate. Even if I didn't know what I wanted to do or who I wanted to be, I was deliberate in my intention to live a life that would make a difference and inspire people and empower people, and that I would leave a living legacy, that I would build it while I was living. So, people often think that you have to have a plan. And I did have a plan of who I would be and how my heart would emote in the world. And then a plan unfolded and I made choices. But I love how the name of the podcast ties to the way I live my life, deliberately and with intention.
Yeah, I love it. You are a deliberate innovator. Well, I'm going to go back for a moment. And I mentioned Liberia, and kind of maybe I'll roll back to the beginning and talk to you. Before being a breast cancer survivor, it seems like your life was defined by survival. Tell me a little bit about your childhood, if you wouldn't mind, in Liberia, and what was it like to escape a war, or wars for that matter? That kind of defined you.
Yeah, I remember the first war, I was 8 years old, and my father, I remember getting up, my mother and father were talking and like hushed, like they were sounding stressed out, and I was like, what's going on? And my mother said, your dad's going to a meeting. And my dad, he was dressed in a suit, and he seemed really like, again, also like tense. And I'm like, what's happening? So unbeknownst to me, while we were sleeping, my brothers and I, a coup d'etat had broken out, and they had put an announcement out saying that people of a certain stature and had certain businesses should come to a meeting. My dad had been watching, talking to people, and he knew, excuse me, that there were rebels going door to door, murdering, raping, killing, cutting up people. Like, it was just horrific, beheading, all kinds of things. So my dad knew if he didn't go to this meeting, they'd come for us. So knowing it was a trap, he sacrificed himself literally for the family and left, and didn't come back for days. My mom and my two siblings at the time and I went into hiding. And my mother, after a few days, told her friend, if I don't go get my husband, he's going to die. Like, I know he's going to be killed, by the soldiers. And she went and rescued my dad. And we fled to the States for the first time at 8 years old. And my dad, after a few months of being in the States, he says, we have to go back. And I said, why do you want to go back? He says, people who couldn't afford to get a plane ticket who are less fortunate, they're still there. They're getting, persecuted. Excuse me, they're getting killed. They have no running water, no food, no electricity. Like, they don't have anything. So we went back, and I was like, this man is crazy. But my father was showing me at the time what sacrifice meant and what commitment to others meant. And we escaped back and forth two more times until the
Wow.
last time in 89.
Wow. I can't help but to sort of kind of reflect on that idea. Most people, when they have an opportunity to escape such a dire situation, they're not coming back. And it kind of highlights for me this point that being a survivor isn't just about surviving. It's about sacrificing, helping.
It's about, I didn't mention that my mom went to rescue my father in the barracks, and he had sacrificed himself to go for us, hoping they wouldn't come find us. And she literally, the entire country was fleeing towards, like, to get out. She was asking to go back into the barracks to go find my father. So they taught me the importance of love and sacrifice and surviving. For me, when I got diagnosed, when your life's flashing before you, you look back at things that made you who you are. Excuse me, allergies. And my father's sacrifice, my mother's as well, telling me that, like, others who don't have what you have can have a worse outcome than you if you don't go back and do something about it. And then them being very selfless about, like, their own lives, putting us and their love before, anything else, and the country and people who were less fortunate. So that taught me the importance of, survivorship is not only about me, it's about who am I going to go back and pull out of the fire that's still in that space.
Wow. Yeah, it's a remarkable story. You were how old again when you fled?
The first war sorry, I don't know why I'm coughing so much. The first war was, I was 8 years old. Second war was 12, and the last was 15.
Wow. So your whole kind of young adult, kind of coming of age years was defined by kind of coping with survival, with war. That's not what most kids deal with in the United States or most of the developing world today. It's got to kind of color or shape the way you view things. How does it, or how has it, do you think, sort of impacted the way you see things, even beyond all the other experiences? So I have curiosity.
Well, Dan, like, my peers in the US, when I made friends here, were all thinking about, fun and playing, and, like, they were not thinking about other people, they think about themselves, right? And my parents had taught me early on that life is so fragile. It could be you're having a good time right now, then the next moment could be all gone. So even things like, arguments, petty stuff, like things that didn't matter, just focus on what matters most, like family and love and commitment to others. It taught me also the importance of knowing that my life mattered, and that anybody who I'm touching, however I'm being in the world, whatever I'm doing, is going to impact their lives. Because my father's sacrifice, when he went back, he was able to give people who were not able to leave, money to be able to, pay for their food, pay for electric bills. My mother was a nurse. and she helped people who were sick in the hospital. So like they went to care for other people. And so that what I learned is not only about money, it's about people knowing that you care about them, that you're going to be holding a space for them and you're going to be holding them. And so, you know, it really shaped me, the compassion they showed for other people. And so like when I got diagnosed, my first thought was like, oh my God, what's happening? But within a matter of months, it was, oh my God, who's coming after me that could have a worse outcome if I don't do something about that? And in my space, in my own war with cancer, because the war was then in my body, this cancer thing, I could have chosen to just run towards a place of like taking care of myself and getting better, forgetting about cancer. But then I think if you think about this problem that we have in these systems, who's facing the problem? You can't just say that, what are they doing? You have to ask, what part do I play, either by action or inaction? In either if you're acting, you're helping to fix, or by inaction, you're a part of the problem. And so I thought, I want to fix these challenges, but I also want to create a space for people who are going through cancer to be able to breathe, to be able to like just know that they're safe and that they're heard and that they're comforted. And that was really lacking when I was diagnosed. So my parents' words and their actions really were embodied in me, and it came back to me, and those things shaped who I have been, who I became, you know. And there are times from now when they say like, are you crazy? You're doing all these different things, and how do you? And I'm like, you're behind, your ass went back into the barracks. You got dressed in a suit and went into like, you both did those things. Like, I'm doing the same thing, but not in a war zone that's a physical with guns, but an invisible, you know, cancer is not, it can't see it. So it's a different kind of war, but I'm doing what they did years later, but in different countries. So those lessons really changed my life and made me who I am today.
We all fight different kinds of wars, and you're right. Some are metaphorical, some are literal. Speaking of which, I want to kind of wind the clock a little bit forward, and from kind of your teen years, you're 32 years old. You're a young mom. You've been in the U.S. for a few years, or well, I guess more than a few years at this point.
Yeah.
You've been here for a little while, and you get sort of the diagnosis that nobody wants to see, that you've been diagnosed with breast cancer. Tell me kind of at that moment, what prompted you, first of all, to go to the doctor? Because screening mammography at 32, unheard of. How did you know? How did it come about? Tell me about kind of what was running through your mind and how you kind of coped with that.
Well, I'll rewind a little bit. My mom is a major factor in my life. She's a nurse, and she worked as the chief nurse running Liberia's Nurse Association back home. And she taught me my breast exams at 13 years old. Wow. And people always ask me what made her do that. But in her mind, she traveled all over the world with the UN and saw people across just everywhere across the country and across the globe, women getting breast cancer at different ages. And they would find it when they were older, but she would wonder if maybe the cancer had begun growing before they even found it. So she said to me when I first began to form my breasts, like, Maimah, remember one day it was raining, she came in my room, she's like, take off your shirt. I'm like, oh my God, she can see them, you know, because at that age, you're embarrassed to even have anything, you know, you don't want to wear a bra, you don't want boys looking at you. And she said, well, it's okay. She says, you know, you're becoming a woman, you're blossoming, and yes, it's beautiful, but that comes with responsibility of knowing your body and how it could change over time. And if you understand your body, your breasts right now, they're small, but they're going to grow. And as your body changes, you'll get, maybe things might grow in there that shouldn't be there. So if you know what the things that don't belong there feel like and look like, and know your body, you'll know what to do if something bad happens. So she didn't scare me. She just taught me the importance of knowing my body, you know, in a way that could impact my life in a powerful way. And so fast forward from 13 years old, 18 years later, I'm taking a shower. By the way, I've been doing my breast exams for 18 years, every single month. Or because
she stuck with it. You really took your mom's advice to heart. A lot of people don't listen to their parents.
African mom, okay? She comes with the slippers. Like, if you don't do what she says, she comes with that slipper. Like, it's not like a American mom. Hey, honey, do that. She's like, listen, you don't eat. So they're very much of a strong disciplinarian, you know, culture. So, but it was for my own good. So I did my breast exams, but I did them without even needing a shower hanger or a reminder. You know, it's like, kind of, to me, it was like brushing my teeth, taking a shower, doing my normal hygienic things. And I was 31 years old when my world changed, taking a shower. I was singing Diana Ross, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Won't forget that moment. I had that whole soundtrack, CD soundtrack, dating myself here. And I remember just washing and touching, and I just felt something. And I was like, what is that? And it was like, oh my God, what is that? And she told me, I said, when I was 13, she said, Maimah, I said, Mommy, how will I know if something happens that's bad? And she said, if you do your breast exam and listen to your body, whenever something changes, you'll know. And I knew immediately the lump wasn't there the month before. She also empowered me to have a doctor that I trusted. So my OBGYN said, you're way beneath the screening age, but what do you want us to do? And I say this because many young women tell these stories about what happened to them. And doctors will say, well, you're too young to have breast cancer. You don't need a mammogram. Come back when you're older. My OBGYN helped me to push for screening, which I had to pay for out of pocket because I was under the age. But I wanted it. She helped me get it. But when I got the results back, they were clean. And the radiologist said, we told you you're fine. I said, well, that doesn't make sense to me. This technology is flawed. I said, you can't see what's in my body, but I can feel it. So that means your technology is wrong. And she literally was like, no, that's not true. This is the best we have. I said, well, whatever would find this tumor, whatever this is in me, this lump hasn't been created yet. And she laughed and said, that's crazy. And I said, well, no, I'm not crazy. I know my body. And so I continued to push for a biopsy, Dan. I pushed for a biopsy for over 6 more months. And finally, after pushing and pushing and pushing, I got a biopsy. It turned out I had triple negative breast cancer, the kind that's still yet untargeted in Black women in the early stage setting, and for which is the most aggressive kind found in often in women who are younger and Black and Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish. But what I learned was some really powerful things during that time. If my mother hadn't taught me the importance of breast exams, I never would have been doing them at 13 to 31 years old. I wouldn't have found the lump. If I didn't have a provider I trusted to help me advocate for mammography, I wouldn't have gotten it. But the technology was wrong. If I hadn't known my body enough to push for a biopsy and against the surgeon's recommendations, I wouldn't have done that, and I would have been dead years ago. And so it taught me some really important things about knowing your body, being your best advocate, having a team that will fight for you. And there's no amount of money that is worth your life. And technology is flawed and the systems are flawed. But I was 32 years old and I didn't understand how all this worked, right? I was just a girl with a baby. And the doctors were like, I'm so sorry, you have cancer. But I'm like, well, what is that? What do you mean you're sorry? And what do you mean that there's no targeted treatment? And what does that mean for my life? And she said, well, the average recurrence rate for what you have is about 5 years. And if you recur, it may probably be a more aggressive stage and then metastatic, and that's it. And I'm like, sitting there thinking, WTF, like, how can this be happening to me? And then I found out later on, I said, are there any treatments targeting this at all? This just triple negative breast cancer. And the answer was no. The answer was no. And so I got a death sentence, although I'd done all the right things. I could die because someone didn't think my life was important enough to fight for within the healthcare system. There was no dense breast screening. My doctor had dismissed me, the surgeon had dismissed me, and there was no research that was focusing on a cancer that was killing Black and brown women disproportionately. That still is today, 17 years later. And so after thinking, like, my world was like spinning. And then I kind of had to sit back after a while. It took me a while to get to where I was like, okay, what can I do about this? But that's the place that most women find themselves in, who look like me, who are that age. You don't know what's coming for you. It does come for you. You go to the doctor for months and months. You get dismissed, denied, delayed. You get diagnosed metastatic. We're sorry, you're going to die, and that's it.
Now,
and it's unacceptable.
I have to ask you, so kind of going back a little bit, I mean, what you did even at 32 to say, I think you're wrong. It's very hard to challenge any established kind of practice, let alone physicians, experts, surgeons who do this craft. They know their technology. They've studied medical school and they're saying, I know it's your body, but we have lots of empiric data. How do you summon the courage? And what are some things that you advise other people who are in your shoes now? Because it still happens all the time.
I'm so glad you asked the question, because when I began to question doctors, I was told repeatedly, you don't question doctors. They're never wrong. You're not a doctor. And there was that thing of like, I thought, well, they have these MDs, PhDs, whatever the hell. I'm just me. But my parents taught me a really powerful lesson when I was younger. My dad, back in Liberia, the country was going through all kinds of strife. And to get by, people would ask for bribes. So he had a business, right? If you didn't give people money, you couldn't get certain things done. And he'd come home many a day and say, he'd be sad, like down. My daddy, what's wrong? He's like, um, I got turned down by this for this deal because I didn't give them money. I didn't do this thing. I didn't bug for the system. My mom also had people that were patients in her hospital that she worked in who were abandoned by their families or by people who didn't have health care. The system was failing them, but she would use her compassion to help and give them money and to help support these patients. So I learned early on the importance of integrity. And my integrity, my foremost integrity is in my life. And I'm meant to be here for a reason and do something about something. And I knew in my instinct if something is wrong in my gut, to know that it's wrong and it's not fair, it's not right, it's not just. But having a doctor tell me that, I'm like, I can feel this lump palpably, but your technology can't see it. And you're telling me that I'm crazy? That makes no sense. Telling me that I'm too young to get a mammogram, because for what? Because some US preventative freaking task force says that. I don't give an F. Like, you can make a rule for me or a policy for me without me in the room. That could kill me. Right. So you're telling me this policy was made that excludes a population of women that look like me that are getting diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer stages because it's a policy. Like, policies are meant to be changed, right? And so I think the problem is that because people have an MD after the name or have X amount of years of experience, they think, well, this is empirical data. This is what I learned. This is how it is. That's not how the world works. To be an innovator in this world is to be open, to be a physician. You have to be open to change. I ask myself every single morning when I get up, how can I be different in my thinking today? What did I do that I have to unlearn and open my mind to absorbing that could be of help to my patients and my constituents and could change these systems? And I look back at the country I came from also, and even this country with, racism and how it's impacted healthcare. And there's so much similarity between Liberia and the US, things that were put in place that were still in effect. Racism breaking down these healthcare systems that weren't working for us. So I could either be a part of that problem and sit back and say, well, I can't challenge policymakers, or I can't challenge the healthcare system, or I can't challenge a doctor, or I could say, well, you put on your pants, same way I put on my pants, like one leg at a time. And you were once a young woman or a young man in medical school learning your way. Help me learn a new way of doing things with you. Be open to the fact that the way you may have learned 10 years ago may be different. My genetic disposition and my DNA is not the one you saw with the patient before me or the one before that. So if you're not open to change, that's how you become a relic, right? No. And people die. And so I can't accept that. And I begin to kind of just speak up and challenge. And the more I kept telling my story, people were saying like, oh my God, my cousin has breast cancer. She was 28. My sister died last year. She was 24. My niece has a lump in her breast. She's 18. And these women and girls, many of them did have breast cancer, Dan. But if they hadn't heard my story, they wouldn't have known to ask. Unbeknownst to me, I was beginning a movement that helped to drive change in the breast cancer world that we know today. But I had to keep asking the tough questions and being deliberate and intentional and saying, what about this? What about that? What if you were wrong and you were to fail forward to win for the patient, right? And that patient wins, right? So I know you want to ask me a question.
Well, you're kind of leaning to where you are now, and the midst of the battling for your life, you kind of made this pact that I'm going to make a difference. If I get through this, I'm going to make a change, which ultimately became Tigerlily. Tell me about how you're working with women right now who get first diagnosed. It's no doubt there's got to be that feeling of why me, this notion of when bad things happen to good people, why do they happen, and how do you work with them? What type of deliberate practices do you help them so they don't get sort of weighed down by grief and frustration and start to move forward and do something that can at least help increase their chances of being successful? How do you help them, given that you do so much work in advocacy with women who are just like you?
I always believe that challenge could be a catalyst, and I think that you mentioned earlier in this conversation how many things I've been through, the wars. I've been held at gunpoint. I've been hit by lightning. I've I've seen people on the streets dead as at 8, at 10, at 15. Like I've been through so many things that were traumatic. Um, I've learned that you can either allow your challenges to destroy you, or you overcome your challenges by moving into who you believe you're meant to be. And so with Tigerlily, I wasn't even through it before I began the organization. I was literally in bed. I'd had my first chemotherapy treatment, and I saw the level of anxiety with which they even talked about cancer. And the way things were so like you come to treatment and you sit here and look at this little bag and you get these things and you go home and you don't complain, and we're busy and people are dying, and and people are just, it was death and fear and a sense of just, it was like a being in a war zone. And I thought, this is not how you love somebody through cancer, through any kind of trauma. You have to help them to breathe. I could not breathe. And so I thought, if I could help a patient who came to me with, the words, "You have breast cancer," what would I do with her? So my doctor that I eventually picked to help me, Dr. Virginia Chiantella, and I saw her at my birthday party. She came to my birthday party, my 17th year cancer-free, was a month ago. She literally she came in the room when she first saw me, and I was sitting with in the chair with my knees under my chin, like shaking. And she said, "Give me your hands." And she said, "Just give me your hands." And I was just like this. And she said, "Breathe, just breathe. I got you. And I'm going to be with you through this entire journey. Just breathe." And she didn't know how much she changed my life in that moment of her connecting with me and putting this safe space around us, this blanket. And so I thought, what would be able to help women through this process? Someone who can hear them, who can see them, who can feel them, who can hold them in a space, whether physically or just even virtually. And so I began going to churches to talk about what I've been through, and ask, are there anybody in the audience who is going through this? I went to schools on my lunch break, to George Mason and others, with my daughter who was 4 and 5, after school on my lunch break. And I began sharing these stories, and there are all these women who felt like, because I was like, people are like, "What are you doing? Why are you beginning a foundation when you're sick?" And I thought, people out here, like, I didn't know I existed. This could happen to me. There are people out here who I don't know that need me. If I don't show up for them, they won't come. So if I build it, they're going to come. And they came, and it happened so fast that I was still working a full-time job. My daughter she was 3, then 4, then 5, and people were coming and calling, and then the media called. And my goal is to really, my mother gave me a beautiful gift, Dan. She taught me the importance of knowing my body, trusting in my gut, like my gut, in my heart, in my head. And that trust that she and I built in terms of knowing my body. Many girls and their moms didn't discuss breast health or family health history. In the Black culture, we hide a lot of things about illnesses, for reasons that are historical. We don't discuss health history. And so if I could educate a girl about her body, encourage her mother and her to talk about their breast health, encourage them to ask about family health history, and to be empowered when it came to their health, that was important to me. But also the system was actually failing us. The mammography age was still high. Women were getting screened and having their dense breast tissue miss tumors. So if the system wasn't working for you and you don't advocate for yourself, you could die, and you most likely would die. And so my goal was to empower, and what I called force multiply, find more of me and build more of me and build an army of angels. And one of our first programs became our Angel Advocacy program. And it's called Advocate Now to Grow, Empower, and Lead. I believe that when you have the gift of life, you are empowered to be responsible for others and paying that forward. But also as an advocate or as a human being, we often don't know the power that exists within us. I had no idea I could begin a nonprofit organization while in treatment, with no money and no board and no resources, and now be a grassroots focused and driven national and then global footprint of an organization that I built literally for the past 17 years. And many of those years were not funded because people didn't think that Black women, like patients, deserve to have and run organizations. We weren't like the bigger ones, but we were making the on the ground grassroots impact. And so I had to figure out who are my foot soldiers that would work with me as me join my army. And how could I build an army of badass women that could challenge and ask and be empowered and know what to ask about and say, no, that's unacceptable. And know you're a doctor, but I'm the doctor of my life. I am the CEO of my health. And that army of badass women grew from 5 to 10 to hundreds. And they began to, we put them in positions of power, like where they were getting involved in policy. We go to the Hill, where I put them in the media. They could share their opinions, but they could challenge, the fact that why aren't there more Black and brown women getting into clinical trials? Well, you're not asking us about them, so we don't know what to ask for. And by the way, there are things that were done that were horribly wrong, which is why we don't trust, right? There are also barriers to trials and to trial adherence. So I began to kind of just lay in bed while in treatment and map out, like, I kind of like will lay in bed and close my eyes and say, in a nirvana, what would this look like for me in the nirvana of what would I create, right? And I began to just kind of systematically like target people. And they were like, you don't have any money, you have no foundation, basically, barely. And you're still working a full-time job. And I said, the currency I operate is one of love and one of hope. And that energy is limitless, right? And we grew from nothing to now where we are today. So it was lighting candle in women one at a time.
There's a few questions that are queuing up, but before I let other people have their say, I have another question for you. So building on this point about building out an advocacy network, what I've always found is change management happens when you do have that force multiplier effect. One big personality, a big person is able to reach many people who are like-minded. How many people are part of that network now? And maybe more importantly, how have you been able to kind of systematically grow and bring more people on and get farther reaches around the country and beyond actually the country? But I'd love to know more about some of those things, because it's not easy to build an advocacy network.
It is not easy. My brothers, I have 4 brothers. One sent me a text yesterday and said, one of my friends wants to begin a cancer organization and wants to talk to you. I said, tell him no. Do not do it. First of all, there are many groups that need help with building with their charities, but I mean, it literally it's not easy, because there are people that have created these systems in healthcare that want them to work because they've been in power, they run them, they make money off these things, and they don't want to be challenged because they want to control things, right? So when a person like me comes along that says, well, I'm like a David and Goliath, you're wrong, and let's change that, they will fight against you. People try to shut me down in the past. People try to make sure I didn't get funded. So for the first 14 years, I wasn't getting like money from biotech and companies because people were saying, don't tell women to get to do their own breast exams, and girls. But if you can't get screening till you're 45 or 55, what the hell do I tell patients? Just to wait till they get metastatic. So there are groups that were founded in these policies that were not wanting to see what I was saying come to fruition. So for me, it was like I had to build an organic army. I had to go against the bigger foundations. I wasn't going against them. I did not like them. I like what they gave me. They gave a good foundation for what was there. They made the worst breast cancer palatable. We could talk about these things. They weren't willing to change as the world changed. So I began to train women about, okay, you're this age, do your breast examinations, ask your doctor questions, question your doctor, hire or fire your doctor. Why is this policy in place? Why can't we get the right kind of screening technology? Okay, go find a company that does screening, ask them questions. Can I go to the research lab? Well, no. Are you in treatment? No, I'm not, but I was. Well, why don't we have better treatments for triple negative breast cancer? So like I kept going places where I shouldn't have been, or people like me didn't go. And I would go to San Antonio Breast or go to Ask One. People would be like, are you a doctor? No. Okay, so well, Dr. So-and-so. So I'm like, no, I should be in these rooms. I should be in these halls. And so I began to train Black women and brown women and young women and take them these places where we weren't invited. And that's how I kind of flipped the script, and now there's more women who are advocating, but it took me 14 years to build this thing. I almost gave up countless times because I felt like I was an elephant pushing a boulder up a hill on roller skates. And there was like a wave coming down on me, and there was like bolts of lightning and thunder and spears. But I knew that I'm never going to leave this planet until I make the mark I'm meant to make. And even then, because people's lives depend on me committing to that love I committed to when I was in treatment, and the healing that they deserve, and the justice in healthcare, and the right to have a joyful life, right? And so I began to train women, but we were doing like fun things too. We did like, pajama glam parties. We had like sleepovers. We had like, spa days. It wasn't all like serious, but we also went to the hill and did some badass shit too, right? So it's all about like talking about health with women and girls where it's fun, but then doing the serious things like going and advocating and saying unacceptable, it has to change, and you have to do it now. And a lot of shit changed. I
Yeah.
look back now and go like, what, I did that? Like really? But and it was not without fear. I mean, because you can't imagine being a young woman challenging these systems that can destroy your reputation or your name or your foundation that before you even started. But I know the place I come from is one of integrity and authenticity, and you can't destroy that, right? And it's still
We
here today.
we've got some really interesting questions from the group.
Oh boy.
The first, no, they're all
Are they good?
all in bounds. One is just a definitional question. Triple negative breast cancer. Why is that so particularly difficult or challenging? Any sort of maybe a little bit of clinical background would be helpful on that one.
I'll give you a layman's term. So most cancers are caused by estrogen. So the cell, they make drugs that can plug the estrogen, the hole, like plug the hole in the cell or plug the whatever. Let's say it's a door, and the treatment can block the door. It's a blocker. And so unlike those estrogen caused cancers, triple negative breast cancer has no receptors that are open to estrogen forming from them. So this is not caused by estrogen, so you can't block the estrogen. So the research has been focusing more on estrogen-based therapies and therapeutics, not those that are not caused by estrogen. If that makes sense. And so because there was not enough research focusing on that kind of breast cancer, it has less targeted treatments. I will also say that kind of cancer is often found most often in Black women and brown women. So people think, well, it's aggressive. Yeah, but why is it aggressive? It's because it's really aggressive, or is it because it's not targeted by treatments? Because women who were white were most often recruited into these studies, so the cancers have more options, right? And so again, the words that are used around triple negative breast cancer, aggressive, angry, hostile, like those same words are used about Black women, that they are angry and hostile. And so like even the way we talk about the kind of cancers we have to change those kind of things. But that kind of cancer is not estrogen based. And so there's no way to block it because they don't know what makes it start in the first place. They are finding that those women that are African of that descent tend to have that more as well. And so one of my key focuses, and I'm really thankful that there are more biotech companies focusing on TNBC the past, like 5 years, because it wasn't a target before, wasn't a main focus. But even yet, there's still only treatment in the metastatic setting, not in the early stage setting. So I never had treatment. And so when you think about unicorns, technically, people like me don't live this long, but I'm still here for a reason. And I'll be here for a long time. But my goal is to ensure that we get better treatments to give women like myself better options, so they have the options and they have a longer life.
There's a lot of research. There's a lot of new treatments that are being developed. We're seeing kind of a growth and explosion, particularly in mRNA. What's disconcerting is what the question that somebody else had brought up, a topic we've talked about in past conversations. The rate of breast cancer seems to be steadily increasing. I know you're not an epidemiologist per se, but what's your hunch? Is this more an artifact of better diagnosis, or is there something else going on, outside exogenously to see the rates are increasing across all groups, but we're seeing pretty high rates, particularly in diverse communities? What do you think is happening, or what type of things have you heard in the conversations you've had with clinicians and experts?
Yeah, I do think that better diagnostics have contributed to the higher diagnosis rates. That's one thing I believe, that there's more screening options. I also think that, there's stress, which impacts our body. And our world is so highly stressed. It's so filled with like toxins also as well, right? So there's the stress of the world we live in right now. There's the environmental causation, like you could buy healthy food at the store that's covered in pesticides. So you're eating, food that has been pumped with hormones and pesticides and other things that are meant to preserve the food, but it's going to harm you in the end, right? We lay with our kids on rugs in the houses that are covered in things to make the rugs water resistant, but that are harmful to our bodies. They're full of toxins as well. Our skincare products, our hair care products, all those things carry, toxins. There are communities of color because of redlining, segregation, that are where they have more waste products in those communities, right? There are some studies that were done recently that show that some communities of color had more cancers, and they did this whole environmental research study. Well, they found that when people who were poorer and have lower wages and they're depressed, they may drink more and then smoke more, and you have these house fires. And they called the firemen to put the fire out, but the suds that were in those hoses were seeping into the water, the running water, and they were carcinogenic as well. So there's all these things that are because of like racism that impact people's where they live, their zip codes. And then if you're in a community that doesn't have access to getting screened, because it's the centers of excellence are further away, like the NCI centers are they're farther away, and you don't have transportation, you may say, well, I can't deal with that right now. I'll feed my kids first, keep my job, and delay screening, hence a higher death rate for Black and brown women. We're not offering clinical trials as much or biomarker testing. So there are all these things that are systemic, racism, impact, environmental, there's fear, there's, lack of, there's barriers to access. There are all these things that are happening. But the thing that bothers me the most is that people of color, Black people, I looked at this research survey, show that we are amongst the largest consumers of like beauty brands, like skin, hair, makeup, and like, certain products that are high dollar. So I always ask people the question, how do you find people to make them buy hair care products, skincare products, and cars and luxury products, but can't find them to get into a trial, right? So if you're saying you can't find Black people to recruit to get them better outcomes, you can find them to get that car, the makeup or the waist trainer. So like, I think it's bullshit. I think that we have to call people out for what it is. Even the algorithms that we use on social media. I have friends who are, I would say like in a more affluent, white and Black in different levels. And I'll say, let me see your Instagram. And I'll look at what they're getting and what their feed is. So whatever they're being fed with is what they consume. And that's what they think is their world, right? But if you're getting fed with content on, health and juicing and fitness, that's what you're going to want to consume more of. So my goal is to help people change what they accept as being fed to them through the media, through the news, through what they focus on in their lives, and what you focus on grows. And for me, health is the most important gift we have. Without our health, we are nothing.
I've got one more question for you from the group. Another one that's probably very familiar. I know you've posted on it, so not surprising that this comes up. In the recent weeks, you referenced the U.S. Preventative Service Task Force.
Oh my God.
They've reduced or changed the screening rate or the screening age for breast cancer. It was at 50. Now it's a 40, and it took a long time for that to happen. It's looked at by many people as a big success.
No, it's not.
I know there's questions being asked, but I'll ask you your reactions to that. Is it enough? What else needs to be done by this task force or the other powers that be with respect to screening?
As you're asking me the question, my blood pressure is getting higher just because it makes me. I'm trying to control my mouth.
Can't get you sick on air. That's
I just no, because I mean, like, it infuriates me that these people create these systems. So even I think it was like 12 years ago, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz and I, she's a dear friend, we went to the USPSTF and said, you cannot put in place regulations that tell women to get screened only at mid-40s. So there's like the ACS recommendations and guidelines. There's a US Preventative Task Force, and then there's the NCCN guidelines. So people are looking at the guidelines who are payors and physicians to say to their patients yes or no to get screening. So one of them says 45, one says 55, one says something different. It's confusing to patients, first of all. But we said to them, whatever you all say, that age is too high. It has to come down. There are women getting diagnosed, like myself at 32 years old, at 28 years old. How do we give those women access to life-saving screening? And we challenged the task force, and we went on the Hill and we pushed against what they were recommending. And we got them to the government to stay, them pushing the recommendations forward, but they still kept putting them out over time. So fast forward, to 2 weeks ago, there's this, oh my God, this aha moment of making the age 30 years old. I was so effing pissed because do you know how many people have died in the past 12 years, 15 years because of their algorithms or their policies or procedures or their idea that they're right? I actually spoke at an NCCN summit last year, and the lady who's the head of the task force was there. She sat next to me and I ripped her a new one. I was polite to her, but I said, how dare you defend these recommendations that are killing people who look like me, but you're sitting there
What is
calmly.
their defense? How do they defend not lowering it to 35 to 30?
They don't. They talk in circles. They talk in circles and they talk in circles. And so I made it a point to make them uncomfortable. So that means talking to their constituents and their funders and policymakers and getting patients to write letters. And, you just make them really hot in the pot. You turn that water up till they can't stay in the pot any longer. And they came out with the recommendations for 30 years, but then they're saying for women for every 2 years. And for me, my population of young women and Black women, that's not enough. So it can't be every 2 years, and 30 isn't it? We have to have women to be able to have screening when they need it, whatever age that they're at. I understand that the more radiation that you have puts you at higher risk for cancer. Mm-hmm. I've never heard a patient that's metastatic who's dying say to me, I'm happy I didn't have screening earlier. So, it's not scaring women. It's not disempowering them. As a matter of fact, it can save their lives. And so my goal is to be able to ensure that women at any age that needs to get, you don't have girls getting cancer at 13 or 18, but it does happen. So if you present with a symptom, give me the chance to say what I want and what I deserve, right? And that's my goal with this whole thing. So I wrote a very stiff rebuttal. I think I said the title was a little too late and we're still dying. And I put it on LinkedIn and I had people email me and say, and I said, yeah, whatever I say, I stand by it because by the grace of God, I'm still here, but many women don't have the privilege I have of life, of living, being alive with all these barriers around screening and not having targeted treatment. So I can't just stand by and be like, well, I'm going to be patient because in 10 years, we've lost many sisters and moms and daughters to cancer because of these task force recommendations and other barriers like, clinical trial barriers and such. And so my goal is to work to change that and to engage my army of angels in making these changes happen, to use my voice and my time and my energy and to make sure that we disrupt these systems and transform how they're thinking about us, treating us, and making sure that we're at the forefront of how these things work and how they're driven and how they change.
I'll throw out a provocation, a provocative thought. What if mammography could happen not in a mammography center or an outpatient care facility, but it could happen right in, you're describing
in your home,
in your shower,
at a CVS.
So the question is, when or how might that technology evolve, or how do we incentivize innovators to create mammography in a box, in a shower, in your hand? And I think that may be the discontinuous kind of disruption, the thing that changes is from, instead of lowering it from 40 to 35 to 30, how do we put it in the hand of every person to increase the probability that there'll be faster detection? I don't know what technologies are out there now, but.
Well, look at this phone. We didn't have this phone years ago. We were using pagers and fax machines, and we couldn't just call somebody in Germany or WhatsApp or TikTok or Instagram and LinkedIn. Like, this has been only within the span of how many years, this phone and how it's changed our lives. So to your point, how do we reimagine what's possible, or how do we dream what's impossible and make that happen?
Absolutely. We're almost out of time, but I have just a couple of quick things I wanted to ask and hear your thoughts on. One is this idea about clinical trials, and you alluded to this, and I want to make sure we didn't skip over trials. Trials have been inherently and traditionally designed in very rigid ways, representative of smaller populations, and getting diversity in clinical trials has been one of the bigger initiatives. It's been very challenging. How do large companies, pharma device companies, and other institutions change the complexion of their trials, literally and metaphorically?
I love that question. One thing we're doing with biotech companies is getting involved with them before the trial starts. So working with them to look at, what communities are you going to find people in? How do you build trust in those, build trust by going in before you start the trial to like understand the demographic, the barriers, the challenges they face, and build their relationships. How do you design the trial? What do you call the trial? Where do you do the outreach for the trial? Where's the trial being done? What does the site look like? What does the content look like? How do the investigators talk with the team? How do you help people overcome barriers to getting into a trial and adhering to a trial? So we've been creating all these really awesome partnerships, engaging biotech in helping to look at the site selection, review ICF forms, and do investigator training, advising them on the entire clinical trial build out. We launched a platform last month called Raise to help patients adhere to clinical trials by having their barriers overcome, to transportation, to financial assistance, to lodging. So people are, saying that all these barriers, just freaking fix it. So we fixed it. We're going to keep growing the platform as well, but we're building out the angel advocate network in communities that are underserved, partnering with biotech to build out the entire clinical trial phase and name the conversation around the community and what do they want to hear and what makes them feel comfortable. And then we are challenging them. We launched an inclusion pledge in 2019 saying that anybody who's touching a Black or brown woman in the clinical trial or in a healthcare setting has to make these commitments to diversity. And so just saying you're going to try and find Black patients is not enough for me. Don't try to find. What is a diversity goal? What are you going to do with that? So we helped them with the diversity planning as well. We also challenged the FDA and said that, your guidelines are bullshit. Like, you can't just issue a recommendation. What is that going to look like to move the needle forward? Issuing a guidance is one thing, but I don't want a guidance. If people don't meet the guidance, how are they accountable? Yeah, so I'm very much of a SMART goal person, like show me what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, how you're going to measure it, how you're going to enforce it, and so forth. And so, the way I am on this call, I'm actually being quite nice and polite on this podcast, but I challenge people. I'm like, this is some effing and I'm like, I say this anywhere I am. I don't care. It's CDC, FDA, NCI, I say what I say, and you have to change this shit or I'm going to keep it being in your face. And I get my angel advocates involved and I challenge people. And then they say, you know what? And I say, what's making you not change? Well, we don't do it that way. Mm-hmm. That's BS. You can change. You can do it this way. Try it and see what happens. And they try and go, oh my God, what a novel idea. It's not novel, it's common freaking sense. So if you let the patient drive and work with us and become a partner, you can change. And I love that we have great partners that we've been working with the past few years to just drive change and build trust in their patients that we've educated now who are totally like, their grandparents lived near, our parents lived near Hopkins when they would kidnap Black kids, they wouldn't go home. And they've learned that there's safety measures in place, there's protection, there's all these things to protect and support Black and brown patients, not just to overcome trust barrier, but to be able to engage with a trial and stay with the trial and adhere to it and have better outcomes. And they're now our biggest ambassadors talking about the importance of clinical trials. And then we have pharma that's listening, right? You think that pharma thinks they're big pharma, they're big biotech. You don't know what we need. You do what you do well. You make medicines. We know what we need in the community. We're trusted. Let us help you help us, right? And so it's becoming a better relationship versus a transaction. And also I challenge people to become heart-based. If it was your child in that chair getting that diagnosis, what would you want for your child? White, Black, or other?
I wanted to ask you just to drill down. I guess my penultimate question for you is about large companies getting the voice of real patients and customers. It is always almost like the experience of going to the zoo of like, oh, look, an endangered breast cancer patient over there. Oh, a pancreatic patient. Let's hear what they have to say. But it is so staged and sort of theatric that it lost the meaning. And I see that's slowly changing. How do you get real, authentic voice of patients and customers so companies will hear it, they'll think about it, they'll embrace it early on? Because it's hard. We being large companies sometimes approach things with a knower's mindset. We know what you need. We don't have to tell us. We know. But often it's misguided. And I think more they're getting that, but there's still a need.
Well, we tell them that you don't know. You know what you're talking about. No one's going to watch an ad on TV that says, take this drug and you're going to have a bloody liver and bloody stool and your blood's going to fall out and you're going to keel over and die and have migraines. And it's like, who's going to watch that? You tell a patient like, do you take aspirin for a headache? Yes. Do you have allergies? Yeah. But to feel better, you took that drug, right? That was once in a trial, right? Oh yeah. Wow. So like we've helped biotech to understand that you do a great job at creating therapeutics. We do a good job at knowing people, and people trust us because we were once in those shoes. Let us help you do that. And so we would have listening sessions where we bring patients and biotech together and we say, Mr. Biotech, Mrs. Biotech, you sit in the audience and listen and let the patient tell you what they need. And we've had these sessions across the country to help to change how people view patients. And we're not just patients, we're experts. We're people that have jobs that became a patient, right? So like when you view a patient as an expert, as a doctor, or somebody working in an office with a PhD or whatever it is, you value their input, you pay them for their time. We also train patients on how to be able to engage with scientists, researchers, policymakers, people in the clinical trial space. So we're not just saying, here's a patient, go tell your story and make people cry. We're saying that your lived experience is so powerful that if they knew what you went through, they would change how they think. So we help them to articulate what to say, how to say it. And we tell our partners, don't tell them, don't coach my patient. Don't tell me that you can't say this, that, the other. If you want to know my truth, let me speak my truth. And we've been really blessed to have partners who go, you know what, as an ally, I should know when to shut the hell up and listen and hear your truth. And then they change. And so we've seen a huge shift. When the murder of George Floyd happened, it was a horrible time. But I think people saw the fact that, as Black women and patients, that foot's on our neck metaphorically all the time, right? We're told to just show up and smile and don't be aggressive. Don't ask for too much. Don't be angry. Don't be too intimidating and too scary. Just kind of be a patient and go home. And that's not happening any longer because, we have to change those views that we're going to keep seeing people die who are Black and brown, whether it's the hands of police or in the healthcare system. And so we train patients to be strong advocates, to not back down, speak up for what they want. And we have, again, some amazing partners who we're working with in biotech, in the policy space as well, and clinical trials to really change the trial system and how it works. And it's really become a beautiful relationship.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's amazing.
I know.
It's been an hour. It feels like it's been 10 minutes. I'm going to ask you one last thing. If you had 3 tips or suggestions, somebody who wants to create this type of change, thinking about it is from a survivor to CEO to change agent. What are 3 tips that you might give somebody that wants to make a difference and they just see a lot of headway and a lot of obstacles in front of them? What 3 things would you recommend for them to do to make real meaningful change like you've done?
I would say having a clear vision. And so like my cousin and I were talking yesterday about, like where I was and where I am today. And she said, your vision's changed. And I said, it's changed, but it was always, I knew where I was going, but I didn't know how I would get there. So the vision was like, I want to create a national and global network of empowered, badass women and men that are changing these systems. So I had a vision, but I had to be able to change how I got there, right? So I thought first, okay, I want to be like this group or that group. Then I thought, but they're not doing the right things. I don't want to be like them. I want to be like me. So having a vision, but being open to like, the hard part is knowing how you're going to be your unique self in the space. How are you going to do it with your own voice? And how are you going to do it differently? And why is what you're doing different? Being able to assess what you're doing. Is it copying and pasting, they say, or is it like a unique offering that's not existing in the world, right? So having a vision, having a unique way of doing what you do in the world, and then being relentless. This is being relentless and being unapologetic in what you deserve, what you want, and what you demand. And I never say ask for. I don't ask for things. I say I want that. I'm taking that. I deserve that. My patients deserve to live. So I have to ask for that for them. So you have to be, because it's not easy to be able to be a change agent. People don't want to see their systems that they've created and make money from and that are comfortable for them be changed and they don't want to have egg on their face or say that they're wrong. And it's not about them being wrong, it's about them saying that I can change. Change is beautiful. It's good. And so having a vision, being willing to adapt as you grow into who you are and be comfortable being comfortable as you change. Because I did change a lot from the girl I was very much, really, more timid, not knowing, but I knew the whole time, but I didn't know how I would do it. And I just kind of was open to like learning, building relationships. And then just being unstoppable. Our tour right now is called Unstoppable. It's the Unstoppable Angel Tour. And so like whenever I heard no, I said thank you. You're ensuring my success. And I just never stopped. And when I get tired, I rest and I take care of myself. I'm a self-care, I'm a total self-care like babe. But I knew that these people in the world deserve for me to show up in it. And so I did. And thank God I did. And thank God I'm still standing.
Well, we're glad you're standing too, and not just standing still, that for sure. Relentless, unstoppable, a force of energy. Maimah, first off, myself, the Deliberate Way, it's a real honor to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Your insight. We look forward to having further chats with you and seeing how Tigerlily continues to have 1,000 flowers blooming. So congratulations on everything you've done. And thank you again.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
All of our listeners here, tune in for our next episode. We'll see you guys very soon. For now, thank you and have a great rest of your day and week. Take care, everyone.